the story's not over yet. Pull up a chair, let's unpack the ending. Every finale leaves a clue. Come find the meaning with us.
Welcome back to the Finale Compass. I'm Jasmine, your host, guide, and fellow pop culture enthusiast. On this show, we strip away the surface level drama of our favorite TV shows, books, movies, and music to dissect the emotional climaxes and also what happens after the dust settles. Today, we're diving into one of the most anticipated television events, the season 5 series finale of FX The Bear, titled The Original Beef of Chicagoland. We're breaking down how 5 seasons of chaos, growth, and perfectionism come to a full circle close. So for anyone joining us for the first time, welcome to the room. I'm Jasmine. I'm a 20-year military veteran, HR leader with a master's in industrial organizational psychology, and a total entertainment fanatic. My obsession with storytelling and human behavior started way back when I used to dream of having my own radio show when I was a kid. And now I get to use that background to analyze how the high stakes fiction on our screens mirrors our everyday lives. So now we're going to get to the part of the show where we recap the show in its entirety as like a brief overview. So The Bear spans 5 seasons, and it follows Carmy Burzato's journey after returning home to Chicago to run his late brother Mikey's debt-ridden sandwich shop, who had just recently killed himself at that point of the show when Carmy comes to the restaurant or the sandwich shop. Over 5 seasons, Carmy, Sydney, Richie, and the kitchen crew, everybody involved with the restaurant, they fight through grief, toxic work cultures, and crushing like all the financial pressure to transform this sandwich shop into an elite Michelin star restaurant, which has been Carmy's dream. He's a high level chef, and so he's been doing this for a long time. And so now he's wanting to take the sandwich shop and kind of turn it into something that they hadn't even thought was possible because of all his training. Across the seasons, the relentless pursuit of perfection takes a massive toll on everyone's mental health, their personal lives, their relationships. Carmy has internal struggles, and he's forced to face the team and confront whether chasing this dream of becoming like a Michelin star restaurant is actually worth destroying his connection that brought him back home in the first place and be around all these people that he kind of grew up with. In the final episode, titled The Original Beef of Chicagoland, the intense fine dining dream comes full circle back to its grassroots origin. So the team puts on their original like sandwich shop shirts. They reach a defining resolution, balancing all these achievements of having the restaurant and what the heartache that it took to get to where they are, with all their heart, the community support, and their identity of the original shop, allowing Carmy and the crew to finally make peace with the past and step into a promising future. So that's kind of the overview of The Bear. And so now we're going to talk about the finale elements and comparing it to real life. So in the first element, in the episode, the series ends by taking the pressure off of this environment that they've been dealing with for the past 5 seasons. Super high intense. I don't know if you've ever watched shows like Gordon Ramsay's Hell's Kitchen or like very similar style show. It's just the intensity of the cooking, the yelling, and everybody bumping into each other and figuring out how to work as a team together. All that is like coming to a close at this point of the show. What happens is that the series finale illustrates the true like picture of what can happen when people actually support each other, love each other, embrace all the good and the bad, and then work together to make this amazing thing that they did together, which was this outstanding restaurant. Spoiler. So it eventually proves that they like elevated themselves. It's about integrating, your raw sense of self with the skills you've gained along the way. So along the 5 seasons, we see that everybody in the restaurant takes on different like chores to kind of be better, to become this like Michelin star restaurant. And so you see at the end, they're kind of like resoluted to that they've accomplished what they wanted to. And now it's only up from there, right? All the hardship, all the crying, all the yelling at each other, all the financial hardships, everything is coming to a close because they are at a place where they are like super appreciative of each other. So now we're going to talk about the real experience. So the fact is that you can't go back to the person who you were originally. Life happens and it shapes you throughout the years. You come across roadblocks to tackle along the way. You learn how to be resilient and overcome all the adversities and the challenges that it takes to get to that end goal. It's how we grow as people, being able to overcome things. I was a teen mom, and when I was young, I had an apartment. I was living in the projects in New York, and school. I remember working through school and working through a medical assistant like course to try to become a medical assistant. All that was happening at the same time, but it was overwhelming. It was a lot of work. I didn't obviously I had a son and, it was just a lot. I was working full time. I was going to school and then I was going to doing this course. So there was a lot going on. Um, all these little things helped me make a decision to join the army. And why did I join the army? For different opportunities for me and my son. I wanted to have like more availability and resources that I didn't feel like I had the time and even the support as much, from people that I cared about. So while I was, you know, um, done with my like the school journey and being in New York and living in, where I was at the time, it's not like I can go back to being that same young person or the same young woman. I had to like kind of figure out like my path. And that means even joining the army, that had its challenges and, location and being and moving out of state and seeing all these different things and being a single mom and all these different factors. The point is that you can't like go back to that, but you can take what you've learned and make that who you are now. And that's part of your journey. It's part of who you are and how you even teach or relate to others. So I think that it's important to see that even at the end of the bear, to see everybody at a sense of accomplishment, sense of feeling like gratitude and like overwhelming of the journey that they've had. It's just like kind of like refreshing to see that good things can happen at the end, even when you think that all these roadblocks that you're tackling along the way can stop you and not help you reach your goal at all. Sometimes it just takes time. So now we're going to go on to the next finale element. It's going to be earning peace versus pursuing perfection. So one of the main ideas of the show or the main premises of the show was Carmy was constantly stressed out. He was always striving to be perfect. And maybe that's relatable and I'm not a chef, so I can't say that for sure. Obviously watching shows and watching like reality TV and sometimes it's not real, but there is a sense of reality there. And knowing like how hectic those environments can be just from an outsider point of view. Carmi like reaches this place of acceptance after the restaurant is where he wanted to leave it, where he promised he would leave it to the remaining owners. And it shows that the ultimate victory isn't like in a star or an award, which is what he was striving for. It's like learning to lay down this obsession that you have with control and allowing yourself to heal. So part of Carmi's journey was that he had a lot of growing pains and, toxic relationships when he was growing up and things that he was exposed to that it felt like he was almost like punishing himself or running away from at times. And that shows with his demonstrated ability to have a relationship with one of the other characters on the show is that he just felt like that he wasn't good enough to be in those relationships because he was so scarred. And then eventually you see him kind of like loosen little by little and like hear other people instead of just hearing his voice, like hearing others, giving him like information or giving him something to look at or to think about. So comparing it, so I was retiring and then finding that calm after storm. So when I was retiring from the military, I was trying to figure out what that would look like after. And there was certainly a calm. Like certainly wasn't the working weekends anymore and the hectic schedules sometimes when there were state emergencies. I just remember feeling burnt out at different points in my life and work and school and being a mom and being a wife and just, it was just all these things that just kind of like rolled together like almost like a tornado. It was just being picked up. It was just being picked up. The need to feel like you're doing everything right. And it sticks with you. You always feel like you need to do everything right. Like I knew even today, like sometimes I feel like I always have to have things like done a certain way. And the truth is it's not always right. We're not always right. You're not always right. The people around you are not always right, but you do the best you can with what you have, is what I'm trying to say. The still needing for control aspect that I cross a lot still to this day, but I just try to find ways to channel that control into other things. So, like, for example, like hobbies, I go hiking, I go swim in the pool, I I read a lot now. I read a lot more and I'm in a book club. So, um, you know, finding other ways other people can channel these controlling aspects or feeling the need to control into other things that they care about, work, um, recreation, whether it's like I mentioned the other week, I like going to the movies by myself. And so, even spending time with your friends and family. And I think that it's important that you have some sort of outlet because it's hard. It's hard being in this world on your own and you need connections. You need to be able to not rely on people, but just be able to like reach out and talk to somebody and having that sense of purpose like that you feel when you talk to other people about things that are going on and or maybe for feedback, maybe you're looking for something to kind of relate to. So I totally get the idea of like pursuing perfection. I think that we trick ourselves into thinking that if we make a mistake that we're horrible or we're going to be looked at horribly. And that's not always the case. I think that we just need to give ourselves some grace and make those mistakes and learn from them so we don't make them again, or make the mistakes so we know how to avoid making those mistakes again. I think that's super important to understand in order to find some sort of peace. So, like, I found that channeling all these little things that I feel like I have to have like control over, things in a certain place is just finding other things to be interested in or kind of deviating my attention to something else that's super important to me. So I think that finding your energy where it's more useful rather than like kind of driving you crazy in the background is needed for everybody. So the next finale element that we're going to be talking about is the evolution of leadership and legacy. So Carmi had this grand plan to leave the restaurant to Sydney, Richie, and his sister. At the end, everyone has their heads held up high. They're proud of what they've accomplished with the restaurant, how they work together, and also how, like, even other people outside of Carmi were like reflecting on themselves and how they grown and to be a leader in their like immediate field, even to see Richie kind of go from this kind of slacker in the beginning of the show, not really caring about anything to like wanting to do something that's super important to him. It makes other people feel good and it makes him feel good for how he comes across and how he's done his job. I love seeing that character evolution of Richie because he's just like, wow, like he's a man at the end of the show, not he's a man. He's a man. She's a woman. Everybody is that person with all of them, with everybody from the restaurant that was working in the restaurant, all of them and the kitchen crew, they're standing confident and they're just becoming these self-sustaining leaders. It just proves that true leadership is about building people up so that the mission can still survive after everything fades, right? So Carmi was like, I need to like get this restaurant so I can leave it in peace. And so he can move on with his life because he realized he didn't want to be in this business anymore and be a chef. So he wanted to make sure that he was setting everybody else up for success. But I think in that process, he not only helped them, he helped himself figure out what was meaningful and what could be focused on. I think everybody learned a huge lesson. They learned many lessons. Um, so I was a huge basketball fan in the 90s around the height of the New York Knicks playing against the Chicago Bulls. I used to play high school basketball when I thought I could play, but I remember one of the biggest rivals of the Knicks, the Chicago Bulls, and Phil Jackson, who was the coach, right? So in his memoir, he had talked about how he used to have a hands-off approach. So during regular season games and playoffs, instead of calling like timeouts when the team was like unraveling or losing momentum or doing stupid stuff, he would intentionally sit on the bench with his arms crossed and let like Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen, and the team figure it out on the court instead of him having to intervene. So in a sense, that's kind of like what Carmi did. He basically disclosed his like goal, what he wanted. And then he kind of had to maybe not always willingly step back, but he sometimes had to step back and they had to figure it out without him there because he was not there to help them figure it out. So there's a show on Netflix called The Last Dance that showed Phil Jackson in doing this specific behavior. And at the time that I was growing up, I didn't really notice or understand while I was watching games what he was doing. But to see it now and have that understanding that that was his purpose, was to take a step back and let them go, like almost like he gave them the tools that they needed in order to be the best on the court. And it was up to them on how they use those tools. And he wanted them to figure out without holding their hand, without telling them what they needed to do. Also, sometimes, maybe they have a different approach than what he was thinking, So I find that very admirable in that you can just step back and let people figure things out when you need to, when you can figure that out. I think that we always, as human beings, don't always figure out the best way to do that. So it's always a learning process for sure. But I think that he had an interesting approach to how he wanted to deal with his team. And look, the Chicago Bulls are still one of the best teams of, at that time anyway, winning championship back to back. So obviously they did something right and Phil Jackson did something right. And so hoping that, sometimes you just do have to take a step back, myself included. I think we're all guilty of not, sometimes wanting to fix things all the time. And sometimes little things you just have to let it run its course so you can see how it ends up. So, yeah. The next thing we're going to talk about is rebuilding chosen family after the calm of the storm. So, like, the climax of the show centers around the restaurant team choosing each other, proving that when the pressure cooker environment cools off, and to use like it because it was a restaurant, so the analogy, the real success is the relationships that survive the fire. So basically, now that at the end of the show, everybody's like, they got this great accolade with the restaurant. They're prepared to move forward. They know how to. Everybody's at a place where they want to be. And to see them at the end having their the family Sunday dinner, and really just kind of embracing each other, embracing each other's families and friends and relationships, and knowing that they're where they want to be and that they purposely choose to be at the restaurant supporting each other, purposely choosing to work there because of the experience they had together, bringing it up and how they could continue to be the best versions of themselves with these people in their lives. I think that's such a great, a great example of seeing like choosing your family, which doesn't always mean blood, but it's just choosing the people that you want to surround yourself with. So post-military retirement was a perfect example of that. I think after you leave a lifestyle that like no longer fits into your life, it's hard to take those friendships you built along the way. And I think that's why, like, I remember being in, and we used to hear about retired people all the time and be like, oh, have you ever heard from this person? And it's like, no, I never really, like, you don't hear about them anymore. It's just really hard to because you're in this environment together and then you leave that environment to still sustain those relationships. Distance certainly plays a factor. But the big thing is, how do you maintain any of these relationships that you valued, right? So I moved away from New York, moved across country, and I remember I was just like, I'm going to miss my friends so much. And it's going to be hard to find like people like that again. And surely you can't replace your friends, right? So I made it a point with one of my gym buddies, and we talk bi-weekly I would say biweekly or every 2 to 3 weeks. Since for like 5 years now, we have a routine phone call. We check in with each other, talk for an hour, talk about all the things we used to talk about in person: family, friends, the gym, life, work, TV, movies, like all these things. And we still do that. We just do it on a more routine basis as opposed to in person, face to face. And then I remember when I went back to New York to go visit, I went back to my old routine, met with that friend again, and we did everything like we used to do when we were face to face. But it felt like we hadn't even like been apart. It felt like time hadn't gone by. It felt like we're just going back to the same thing that we used to do because it was so familiar. It was friendly. It was loving. It's everything. So I think that's important when you're trying to like value relationships and like what you need to do. Like everybody's responsible, and sometimes life gets in the way and things get delayed, and that's okay too. I mean, it is absolutely a chore, and sometimes we get too relaxed, and it's just like, well, that person is not putting that effort in, so I'm not going to bother. Which is why you should, because a text doesn't hurt. A phone call doesn't hurt. And, having these routines or not routines, even if you're catching up with somebody like every few months or something like that. It's just being able to have that familiarity of somebody who you care about and that something stays the same even when everything else around you is changing, right? And so for me, having these biweekly calls is so important for me because it makes me still feel like I have that friendship and and it's still the same and it's still supportive. And I think that it's just putting the effort in at the end of the day. And I think people forget that sometimes, you don't put effort, then you're going to lose these relationships and you have to work at it. Even if it says not routine as a biweekly call, it's checking in with your old mentors, talking to old battle buddies every, few months. It's certainly, it's something probably not on the top of your list when thinking about, but when you're trying to establish and still maintain those relationships and and how important they are to you, how they were important to you before, they still can be important. You just have to put forth the effort and reach out. So yeah. So now we're going to be going to our last finale element. It's one chapter to begin the next. So the final moments of the episode, it emphasizes that the finale isn't an ending, but it's actually the settling of like dust settling. So everybody can finally move forward with clarity and cadence. So you see this when Carmy chooses a new career, and I won't spoil that, so you can watch the show if you haven't seen it yet. But it was slightly hinted throughout the show with his like little book and how he was coming up with his recipes. So I'll leave that there. But knowing that he has this like clarity and then chooses something completely different for a new career because he feels like that would be the best move for him. So in hindsight, when you're thinking about like realistically, moving on is so hard. I don't know if anybody can remember this from the early 2000s, but Dave Chappelle had this comedy sketch show. He used to do all these different characters and sketches. It was so funny. I recommend YouTubing it when you get a chance, or going on the Comedy Central, I think the channel's called, so to go watch the Chappelle show, the Dave Chappelle show. It was a massive hit, and Comedy Central eventually, because it was such a hit, they wanted to they handed him a $50 million contract for season 3 and 4 because it was such a hit. Everybody loved it. So funny. But right in the middle of production, Dave Chappelle, he abruptly walked away from the show, from the money, from Hollywood entirely, and then flying to South Africa so he could kind of recalibrate. Dave Chappelle said that he realized the intense environment and corporate pressure were warping his creative voice and affecting his mental well-being. He talked about this in several interviews after he came back from this period of not really speaking to anybody. He ultimately traded fame and tens of millions of dollars for his integrity, his control over his art, and his privacy. So years later, when we see him return, he returned to stand up, but he did it on his own terms. So how relatable is that? He was in an environment that he loved, and then it turned into something that he didn't want it to be. And he started to lose himself a little bit and not feel the same way and the same joy that he did doing that show when he first started. And then he took a break. kind of found himself, kind of probably did a lot of meditation, I'm assuming, of course, or, some self-reflection and determining what he wanted for his career and his future. So when we see Dave Chappelle pop up now, it's like, whoa, it's like, where did he come from? Because he does still do stand-up. He still does his own things. I think he did an SNL episode not too long ago. So not too long ago, probably a few years ago, but I remember seeing it when he came back and then making jokes about him, being absent and how he walked away from this like $1 million contract. So it goes to show you that it's not always about the money. It's kind of about your integrity, your voice, and how you feel like the pressure of everything else can actually change that voice and change the way you feel about how you love what you used to do, So eventually he gave all that up and just did it on his own terms. And that's it's pretty admirable. And I think that it's super relatable because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter all the accomplishments you did. It's about how it makes you feel at the end of the day. And that, relating that to like leaving, the military, right? Moving on is really hard. Even moving away from your friends and moving away from your neighborhood is really hard. But it's about just kind of finalizing things in your own terms when you're ready to. And I thought that was a great example. So now we're going to sign off. And no matter what high stakes shift you're working through today, remember that every ending gives you the space to step into your next chapter. The opportunities will be there. Keep working towards it and keep your compass steady. Thanks for listening. And see you next time where we discuss another great ending to another great TV show, movie, song, or book. See you next time. Bye.